Imagine standing at the center of an empire that, only a few years earlier, seemed unstoppable. Its ruler was Stefan Dušan. He ruled Serbia from 1331 to 1355, 24 years in which the Serbian state reached its greatest territorial extent. Macedonia, Thessaly, Epirus, and significant parts of Albania came under his rule. This was no longer simply Serbia. It was an empire, and in 1346, its ruler made that transformation official. At Skopje, Stefan Dušan was crowned emperor of the Serbs and Greeks. In the same year, the Serbian archbishopric was elevated to the rank of patriarchate, strengthening the religious and political foundations of his imperial rule. Then came the opportunity that allowed Dušan to expand even further. From 1341, the Byzantine Empire was consumed by civil war. While Byzantine factions fought for power, Dušan moved into Byzantine territories, extending Serbian control across Macedonia, Albania, Epirus, and Thessaly. The Serbian Empire was expanding, but its greatest strength was also creating a dangerous weakness. Its territories have been brought together under one extraordinarily powerful ruler. And when that ruler disappeared, there was no guarantee that the empire could remain united without him. In 1355, Stefan Dušan died suddenly. The empire did not disappear that day. The throne passed to his son, Stefan Urozvi. The territories remained. The title remained. The imperial state still existed. But the center was weakening. Powerful regional rulers began exercising increasing control over their own territories, while the Ottoman Empire was advancing into the Balkans. Around 1361, the Ottomans captured Adrianople, and Sultan Murad I made it his capital. The danger was moving closer. Then came 1371. On September 26th, Serbian forces commanded by the brothers Vukašin Mrnjavčević and Jovan Abuljiza were defeated by the Ottomans at the Battle of Maritsa. Both brothers were killed. That same year, Stefan Urozvi died. The Nemanjić dynasty, which had ruled Serbia for generations, came to an end. But the Serbian state did not vanish immediately. That is what makes this collapse so remarkable. The Battle of Kosovo would not come until 1389. The final Ottoman conquest would not come until 1459, when Smederevo, the capital of the Serbian despotate, fell. From Dušan's death in 1355 to the final disappearance of medieval Serbian independence in 1459, more than a century passed. So the real mystery is not simply how Serbia was conquered. It is why an empire that had reached such extraordinary power under one ruler became so vulnerable after his death. And to understand that, you have to go back to the beginning, to the moment when Dušan's greatest victories were quietly creating the conditions for the empire's eventual collapse. When Stefan Dušan died in 1355, the Serbian Empire did not collapse immediately. That is the first detail you need to understand. The empire still existed. Its territories still stretched across Macedonia, Thessaly, Epirus, and significant parts of Albania. The imperial title remained, and Dušan's son, Stefan Urozvi, inherited the throne. But inheritance was not the same as control. Dušan had ruled Serbia from 1331. And during those 24 years, his personal authority had held together territories acquired during a period of Byzantine weakness. From 1341, the Byzantine Empire had been consumed by civil war. Dušan exploited that crisis, expanding Serbian power into Byzantine territories. His victories created an enormous state. They did not automatically create a stable one. After his death, powerful regional rulers increasingly controlled their own territories. The central authority of Stefan Urozvi weakened, while local magnates became increasingly important political forces. Among them are the brothers Vukašin Mrnjavčević and Jovan Ugljiša. And then, another danger appeared from the east. The Ottoman Empire was advancing into the Balkans. Around 1361, the Ottomans captured Adrianople. Sultan Murad I made the city his capital, placing the Ottoman political and military center much closer to Serbian territory. Now Serbia faced two problems at once. Its imperial structure was fragmenting internally, while an expanding military power was establishing itself nearby. By 1371, the consequences became impossible to ignore. On September 26th, forces commanded by Vukašin and Jovan Ugljiša confronted the Ottomans at the Battle of Maritsa. The Serbian commanders were killed, and the defeat severely weakened the Serbian states. That same year, Stefan Dušan died. With his death, the Nemanjić dynasty came to an end. But the irony was brutal. Serbia had not been destroyed by a single invasion. The empire was breaking apart while its enemies were becoming stronger. And the question was no longer whether the old empire could survive unchanged. It was whether anyone could gather its fractured power before the Ottomans reached the heart of Serbia. The decisive break came on September 26, 1371. You can imagine the situation before the battle. The Serbian Empire that Stefan Dušan had built was already divided by competing regional powers. His son, Stefan Dušan, was still the emperor, but his authority had weakened. To the east, the Ottoman Empire was expanding, and around 1361 the Ottomans had captured Adrianople and made it the capital of Sultan Murad I. Now, in 1371, two Serbian rulers decided to confront this growing threat. Vukašin Mrnjavčević and his brother Jovan Ugljiša commanded the Serbian forces that moved against the Ottomans. Their objective was clear: resist the Ottoman advance before it became impossible to stop. But the encounter at the Maritsa River ended in disaster. On September 26th, the Serbian forces were defeated. Vukašin was killed. Jovan Ugljiša was killed. The defeat did something more important than destroy one Serbian army. It accelerated the political fragmentation that had already begun after Dušan's death. The empire had lost another layer of leadership. And then came another blow. Stefan Dušan died in the same year. With his death, the Nemanjić dynasty came to an end after generations of rule over Serbia. Think about the timing. In 1355, Stefan Dušan died. 16 years later, in 1371, the Serbian forces suffered the catastrophe at Maritsa. Vukašin and Ugljiša were dead, and Dušan was gone. The dynasty that had produced Dušan no longer stood at the center of the state. But this was not yet the final destruction of Serbia. A new generation of Serbian rulers would emerge from the political vacuum. One of the most important would be Prince Lazar Hreljanović. Lazar established his political center at Kruševac and expanded his territories, including control over the important mining region of Rudnik. The Serbian world was changing. The old imperial structure had fractured, but new Serbian power was beginning to take shape. And this is where the story becomes more complicated. Because Serbia still had enough strength to resist the Ottomans, but it no longer had the emperor who had once commanded the entire empire. The question now was whether Prince Lazar could accomplish what Stefan Dušan had failed to do: unite enough Serbian power to face the empire advancing from the east. By 1371, the old imperial order had broken apart. Stefan Dušan was dead. His son, Stefan Dušan, was also dead. Vukašin Mrnjavčević and Jovan Ugljiša had fallen at the Battle of Maritsa on September 26th. The Nemanjić dynasty had reached its end, but Serbia itself had not disappeared. Instead, power began gathering around a new figure: Prince Lazar Hreljanović. Lazar did not inherit the Serbian Empire created by Dušan. He emerged from the political fragmentation that followed its collapse. His rise was therefore different from Dušan's. He was not simply taking control of an already unified empire. He was building a new center of power among territories controlled by competing regional rulers. His political center was established at Kruševac. From there, Lazar expanded his territories and strengthened his position. One important acquisition was the mining region of Rudnik, an economically valuable area that gave his state greater resources and increased its political importance. You can see the transformation taking place. The empire of Dušan had depended on imperial authority concentrated in one ruler. After 1371, Serbia increasingly depended on the ability of individual rulers to gather territory, resources, and political influence around themselves. And Lazar was becoming the most important of them. But his challenge was enormous. The Ottoman Empire was no longer a distant power whose expansion could simply be watched from afar. Around 1361, the Ottomans had captured Adrianople, and Sultan Murad I had made it his capital. The Ottoman political and military center was now established deep inside the Balkans. Lazar therefore inherited a Serbia surrounded by danger. To the west and north, Serbian political power was divided among competing rulers. To the east, the Ottomans were expanding. And behind Lazar stood the memory of an empire that had once reached Macedonia, Thessaly, Epirus, and significant parts of Albania under Stefan Dušan. Here lies the bitter irony. Lazar's Serbia was becoming stronger at precisely the moment when the strategic situation around it was becoming more dangerous. He could rebuild Serbian power. He could establish a new political center. He could expand his territories. But he could not restore the empire that Dušan had created. And soon, Lazar would face a decision that would determine whether this new Serbian state could survive at all. There was no single law that destroyed the Serbian Empire, and that distinction matters. The collapse of Dušan's state was not caused by one decree that suddenly stripped an entire population of its homes or possessions. The verified evidence points instead to a political breakdown. The weakening of central authority after 1355, the rise of regional rulers, the defeat at Maritsa in 1371, and the growing Ottoman presence in the Balkans. But Dušan had attempted to give his expanding empire something that could survive beyond his own personality, a legal structure. In 1346, the same year he was crowned Emperor of the Serbs and Greeks at Skopje, the Serbian archbishopric was elevated to a patriarchate. This strengthened the religious foundation of his imperial state. The empire was therefore built around more than military conquest. It had an imperial title. It had a strengthened church hierarchy. And it had territories governed under a Serbian imperial system. Yet none of these institutions could solve the central problem that appeared after Dušan's death. Who possessed the authority to command the entire empire? Stefan Uroš V inherited the throne in 1355, but the political reality changed rapidly. Powerful regional rulers began exercising increasing control over their own territories, weakening the authority of the emperor. There was no simple mechanism capable of forcing every powerful noble to remain permanently obedient to the center. And then, the external threat became stronger. Around 1361, the Ottomans captured Adrianople, and Sultan Murad I established his capital there. The Serbian political world was therefore becoming divided at precisely the moment when a powerful Ottoman state was establishing itself deeper in southeastern Europe. By 1371, the consequences were visible on the battlefield. Vukašin and Jovan Ugljiša attempted to confront the Ottomans at Maritsa. On September 26th, their forces were defeated, and both brothers were killed. The same year, Uroš V died. The Nemanjić dynasty ended. So the real law of Serbia's collapse was not written on parchment. It was the harsh political law of a fragmented medieval state. When central authority weakens while an organized external power advances, every regional ruler must decide whether survival depends on unity or on protecting his own territory first. And Serbia was about to discover the price of that choice. The collapse of an empire is usually described through rulers, borders, and battles. But the people who lived through it experienced something much more immediate. They watched political authority change around them. After Stefan Dušan's death in 1355, the Serbian Empire gradually fragmented. By 1371, Vukašin Ranjavčević and Jovan Ugljiša had been killed at the Battle of Maritsa, while Stefan Uroš V also died that year. The Nemanjić dynasty had ended. Yet the people living in Serbian territories did not simply disappear when the dynasty disappeared. They remained in towns, villages, and territories increasingly controlled by different political powers. One of the most important figures to emerge was Prince Lazar Hrebljanović. His political center at Kruševac became an important base of Serbian power, while his control extended into the mining region of Rudnik. For the ordinary person, however, the political map could change without offering any simple choice. The ruler might change. The center of power might move. The threat from the east might grow. And then, an empire that had once expanded into Macedonia, Thessaly, Epirus, and significant parts of Albania became a collection of Serbian territories facing a much stronger external force. The human cost was therefore not limited to those killed in battle. Political fragmentation meant that communities increasingly lived under different regional authorities. The disappearance of the Nemanjić dynasty in 1371 removed the ruling house that had stood at the center of Serbian political life for generations. There was also another transformation. The Ottoman Empire was no longer merely approaching from a distant frontier. Around 1361, the Ottomans captured Adrianople and Sultan Murad made it his capital. For people living in the Balkans, the political balance had changed permanently. Serbia still had rulers. It still had territory. It still had the ability to resist. But the old certainty was gone. The empire created by Dušan could no longer protect its territories through one imperial authority. And the people living inside those territories were increasingly forced to experience history not as a grand political transformation, but as uncertainty over who would control their land next. The final tragedy was still years away. In 1389, Lazar would face Murad, and when that confrontation came, the collapse of an empire would become a human story written in the deaths of two rulers. By the late 14th century, the greatest danger to Serbian independence was no longer simply internal rivalry. It was the Ottoman advance. Around 1361, the Ottomans captured Adrianople, and Sultan Murad made the city his capital. The new Ottoman center placed their power deep inside the Balkans, much closer to the Serbian territories that had once formed part of Dušan's empire. For Prince Lazar Hrebljanović, the strategic situation was becoming increasingly dangerous. But there was no single Serbian authority capable of restoring Dušan's empire. After Stefan Uroš V died in 1371, the Nemanjić dynasty ended. Regional rulers had already gained significant power, and the political landscape that Lazar inherited was fundamentally different from the unified empire created under Dušan. Lazar therefore faced a choice that was larger than his own ambitions. He could attempt to preserve his own territory, or he could try to create enough unity among Serbian forces to resist the Ottoman expansion. The consequences of that decision would eventually lead him towards Kosovo. It would be misleading to imagine that Serbia simply stood alone against the Ottomans. The Balkans were a political landscape of competing rulers, shifting alliances, and changing centers of power. The Serbian territories themselves had been fragmented after Dušan's death, while the Ottomans were building an increasingly powerful state. And then, the defeat at Maritsa demonstrated what this imbalance could mean. On September 26, 1371, the forces of Vukašin Ranjavčević and Jovan Ugljiša were defeated. Both commanders were killed. That defeat did not immediately erase Serbian political independence, but it demonstrated the consequences of confronting the Ottomans without the strength of the old imperial structure. Lazar's position, therefore, became increasingly precarious. He had established his center at Kruševac and expanded his territories, including the important mining region of Rudnik. Yet his political strength existed within a wider Serbian world that remained divided. There's a bitter irony here. The Serbian Empire had reached its greatest size under Stefan Dušan, partly because neighboring Byzantine power was weakened by civil war. But the same region that had allowed Serbia to expand was now becoming the battlefield for a new power. The Ottomans were no longer merely exploiting Balkan divisions. They were becoming the dominant force within them. And Lazar was moving towards a confrontation in which political survival, Serbian unity, and personal fate would collide on one battlefield. That battlefield was Kosovo. By 1389, the Serbian Empire created by Stefan Dušan was already gone, but Serbia itself still existed. That distinction is essential. The political fragmentation that followed Dušan's death in 1355 did not produce an immediate Ottoman conquest. Serbian rulers continued to control their own territories, and Prince Lazar Hrebljanović had established a powerful political center at Kruševac. The Serbian world had changed, but had not disappeared. Then came the Battle of Kosovo in 1389. Prince Lazar and Sultan Murad I both died during the battle. The consequences reached far beyond the battlefield. Serbia became increasingly vulnerable to Ottoman domination, but the country did not vanish immediately after Kosovo. Serbian political institutions survived, and the Serbian despotate would continue for decades. This is where the story becomes larger than one empire. The collapse of Dušan's state changed the balance of power across the Balkans. The territory that had once been expanded rapidly under Serbian rule was now part of a region increasingly shaped by Ottoman expansion. And then, the political landscape of southeastern Europe began to transform permanently. The Ottoman Empire continued expanding. Serbian rulers had to operate within a new regional order in which Ottoman power could no longer be ignored. The old imperial ambition of reaching deep into Byzantine territory had been replaced by the struggle to preserve what remained of Serbian independence. The consequences were not confined to Serbia. The weakening of Byzantine and Serbian power created opportunities for the Ottomans to strengthen their position across southeastern Europe. The Balkans were gradually drawn into a political system dominated by Ottoman expansion. Yet the final disappearance of medieval Serbia still lay decades ahead. The Serbian despotate survived after Kosovo and continued as a distinct Serbian state. Its existence proves that 1389 was not the simple moment when Serbia ended. The final date was 1459. That year, the Ottomans captured Smederevo, the capital of the Serbian despotate. With the fall of the city, independent medieval Serbia finally disappeared. From Dušan's death in 1355 to Smederevo's fall in 1459, the process lasted 104 years. That is the wider historical echo. An empire can collapse politically long before its people disappear. Its institutions can fracture, its rulers can change, and its borders can shrink, while the memory of the state continues. And that memory would survive long after the last medieval Serbian stronghold fell. When Smederevo fell in 1459, medieval Serbia finally lost its independence. But the end of the state was not the end of the Serbian people. The political structure created under the Nemanjić dynasty had disappeared. Stefan Dušan had died in 1355. Stefan Uroš V had died in 1371. Prince Lazar had fallen at Kosovo in 1389, and the Serbian despotate survived until the Ottoman capture of Smederevo in 1459. What remained was memory. The old empire had existed for generations under the Nemanjić dynasty. Its rulers had expanded across Macedonia, Thessaly, Epirus, and significant parts of Albania. Its religious institutions had been strengthened when the Serbian archbishopric became a patriarchate in 1346. Even after political independence disappeared, that historical legacy did not simply vanish. Centuries later, Serbia would once again become an independent state. But that development belongs to a completely different historical era and cannot be directly presented as a continuation of Dušan's empire. The medieval Serbian state had ended. Its people, culture, and historical memory had not. This distinction is important because the collapse of an empire is often mistaken for the disappearance of a nation. In Serbia's case, the political state could be conquered while Serbian identity continued through communities, traditions, and institutions. And then, the memory of the medieval rulers became increasingly important. Stefan Dušan remained associated with the greatest territorial expansion of medieval Serbia. Prince Lazar became inseparable from the memory of Kosovo. The Nemanjić dynasty remained central to the story of Serbia's medieval past. But there is another irony. The empire that Dušan created did not survive him as a unified political structure. The dynasty ended in 1371. The Serbian despotate ended in 1459. Yet the names of the rulers survived for centuries after their political institutions disappeared. That is why the final chapter of this story cannot be measured only by the fall of Smederevo. A conquered state can disappear from the map. A dynasty can end. A capital can fall. But historical memory can survive all three. And centuries after the medieval Serbian state vanished, its story would still raise the same question. If an empire can disappear in less than a century, what exactly survives when the state itself is gone? The Serbian Empire has been gone for centuries. Stefan Dušan died in 1355. The Nemanjić dynasty ended in 1371. Prince Lazar died at Kosovo in 1389. And in 1459, the Ottoman capture of Smederevo ended the independent medieval Serbian state. But the story did not disappear with the state. Today, the territories once ruled by Dušan are divided among several modern countries. Macedonia, Albania, Greece, and Serbia are no longer provinces of one medieval empire. The political map of the Balkans has been transformed repeatedly since the 14th century. Yet the memory of medieval Serbia remains visible in the modern country of Serbia. The names of Dušan, Lazar, and the Nemanjić dynasty continue to belong to Serbia's historical memory. Their story survives because political borders can disappear much faster than the identities and memories created by generations. And there is a bitter irony here. Dušan spent 24 years expanding Serbian power. By 1346, he had become emperor of the Serbs and Greeks, and his state had reached its greatest territorial extent. But only 16 years after his death, the Nemanjić dynasty was finished. The empire did not fall because one enemy army suddenly destroyed everything. It weakened through fragmentation. Regional rulers gained power. Central authority declined. The Ottomans established themselves in the Balkans. The defeat at Maritsa in 1371 exposed Serbia's vulnerability. Kosovo followed in 1389. Smederevo finally fell in 1459. The process lasted 104 years after Dušan's death. That is the deeper lesson. An empire is not simply territory on a map. It depends on institutions, political unity, and the ability of one generation to preserve what the previous generation created. Dušan built an enormous state. His successors could not keep it together. And that is why the collapse of the Serbian Empire is ultimately a story about the fragility of power itself. A state can survive the death of its ruler, but cannot survive forever when the political structure holding it together disappears. If you want more documentaries about forgotten empires, fallen dynasties, and the people who lived through their collapse, subscribe to the channel. Each story helps recover a past that can disappear from memory as completely as it once disappeared from the map. And if you had to choose between preserving a collapsing empire or protecting the people living inside it, which would you choose?